Let us take a look at the German General Staff in the Second World War. As you probably might know, after the First World War, the German General Staff was banned by the Versailles Treaty. To quote parts of Article 160, the Great German General Staff and all similar organizations shall be dissolved and may not be reconstituted in any form. Of course, the Germans circumvented that. Sadly, information on this organization is actually quite limited. Big thank you to Roman Töppel for pointing me to several sources, and I also found some stuff in the German military archives. In this video we look at the various structures and functions of the General Staff. So let us start before the war. Due to the Versailles Treaty, the Reichswehr established the so-called Truppenamt, basically meaning troop office, that basically performed the functions of a General Staff. It consisted of 5 sections or Abteilungen in German. Note that Abteilung can also be translated with department, branch and other terms as well. T1, the Heeresabteilung Army Section. It was also called Land Defense Section, Abteilung Landesverteidigung. T2, the Organisationsabteilung, Organization Section. T3, Fremde Heere, Foreign Armies, although its codename was Heeresstatistische Abteilung, Statistical Section. This was dealing with military intelligence. T4 was the Troop Training Section, and finally T7, the Transportabteilung, Transport Section. Note, there were no T5 or T6. Note the various functions of these sections will be explained once the war starts, because both structure and functions changed after the mobilization. In 1935, a few months after the Reichswehr was replaced by the Wehrmacht, the Truppenamt was officially renamed the General Staff of the Army, and saw some expansion as well. There was a minor restructure and some sections were added, namely the Quartermaster Section, the Military Science Section, and the Technical Section. There were several expansions over the years, yet probably the most interesting is the structure of November 1938, so about 10 months before the start of World War II. Note, according to Müller-Hillebrand, this structure was still in use in 1939, just before the outbreak of the war. At the top was the Chief of the General Staff. Under him was the Zentralabteilung, Central Section, the only section that was not grouped under one of the 5 Oberquartiermeister. Literally translated High Quartermasters, but Senior Quartermasters is a better translation. Note, the term Oberquartiermeister can be a bit confusing, so here's a short explanation. Traditionally, older General Staff officers were entrusted with the management of certain General Staff areas to relieve the burden on the Chief of the General Staff. They were given the title Senior Quartermaster with a Roman number designation. The Senior Quartermaster 1's main job was command. He was also the deputy of the Chief of the General Staff in his absence. The Senior Quartermaster 2 dealt with training, the Senior Master 3 with organization and technical aspects, the Senior Quartermaster 4 with military intelligence, and the Senior Master 5 with military science. Now let us look at the different sections. Under the Senior Quartermaster 1, there was the Operations Section, the Transport Section, the Quartermaster Section, the Military Surveying and Mapping Section, and finally the Section for National Fortifications. Under the Senior Quartermaster 2, there were 2 sections, one for troop training and one for the General Staff Education and Regulations. Under the Senior Quartermaster 3, there were the Organization and Technical Sections. Under the Senior Quartermaster 4, the previous section Foreign Armies was divided into 2 sections, namely Foreign Armies West and East, Fremde Heere West and Ost. Note, even later on there was never a Foreign Armies North or South. There was also an attaché group that supported German and foreign military attachés. One source notes it was a section, but another one doesn't. Since I ran clearly out of space, I didn't include it. Under the Senior Quartermaster 5, there was only one section, the Kriegswissenschaftliche Abteilung, the Military Science Section. Note that the section performed different tasks and functions during peace and wartime. In this video we look at the wartime function only. But first we need to look at how the structure was during the war. For this we look at 1940. The mobilization of the army in 1939 brought significant changes for its high command and its areas of responsibility. These resulted from the increase in the size of the army by several times its peacetime strength, and from the necessity of leading this army in mobile operations and also outside the borders of the Reich, and of supplying it with everything necessary for warfare. The major changes were as follows. The senior quartermaster 2 and 3 were removed. 2 sections were entirely removed. The technical section became part of the organization section. And the section for national fortifications was also removed. Spoiler alert, the fortification section will see 2 comebacks, a short one in 1940 before the attack on France and the final one in 1944, although it will then be integrated into another section in late 1944. For the other changes, let us look at the 1940 structure. As you can see, the central section was moved under the senior quartermaster 1, as were the organization and training sections. The senior quartermaster 4 was expanded, an attaché section and a liaison group were added. The latter isn't shown. The senior quartermaster 5 was expanded as well. It received the military surveying and mapping section. That was originally under the senior quartermaster 1. The quartermaster section was expanded into the Quartermaster General für Supply and War Administration, Generalquartiermeister für Versorgung und Kriegsverwaltung. The transport section was expanded into the Chief of Army Transportation, Chef des Transportwesens. Additionally, the following were added: Chief of the Weather Service of the Army and the Commandant of the Headquarters of the Army High Command. Then there was the Chief of the Army Signals, Heeres Nachrichtenwesen, and the General of the Luftwaffe at the Chief of the Army, so a liaison officer from the Air Force. Keep in mind here that the horizontal order of this graph is not necessarily historically correct. The available sources had at points very different arrangements. For instance, the position of the commandant. This layout is my best interpretation, but with the compromise to fit the sections below the respective senior quartermasters in a visually appealing manner. So let us look at the various sections and important positions and their functions during the war. First, the Chief of the General Staff was directly below the commander of the German army, and his first advisor and his deputy as well. His duties were to provide proposals, support the decisions made by the commander, and to train the general staff members to their duty. Here is part of his requirements. His field of work also includes all issues related to the command of war. He sets out the resulting demands with regard to personnel, material, and war economy of the army and provides guidelines for the organization, training, arming, and equipment of the war army, field army, and the replacement army. Next are the other chiefs. The Chief of Army Transportation was also Chief of the Wehrmacht Transportation. For the uninitiated, the Wehrmacht consists of the German Army, Navy, and Air Force. For more information, see this video. The task of the Chief of Transportation were to provide suggestions to the General Staff about the use of transport, to direct transportation based on the orders by the General Staff, and to ensure the proper execution. Although keep in mind he only had railways and inland waterway transport under his authority. The Chief of Army Signals was responsible for maintaining the connections between the command posts of the field army and signal intelligence. Then there was the Quartermaster General. With the mobilization of the Chief of the 6th Section responsible for supply and administration was elevated to Quartermaster General and placed directly under the Chief of the General Staff. He was the technical superior of all reservices of the field army. In liaison with the operations sections of the General Staff, he issued orders and directives for the management of supply and directed the military administration of the occupied territories. The senior quartermasters of the armies dealt with him directly in all supply matters. At the same time, he exercised jurisdiction as a court-martial over the members of the Army High Command headquarters and the subordinate troops and official positions. So let us look at the sections. The central section, Zentralabteilung, was responsible for the personnel management, including the position of all general staff officers. Additionally, it organized the official services of the General Staff of the Army, the Courier Service. The operations section's Operationsabteilung created the operational plans, the operational organization, as well as the orders to the various commands of the field army. Additionally, it informed the Wehrmacht's operations staff, Wehrmachtsführungsstab, about the situation at the front every morning and evening. The organization section, Organisationsabteilung, created and maintained the organization of the units in the field army, the command powers of new officers, and aspects of top-level structure. Additionally, it dealt with the commander of the replacement army about the requirements for material and personnel replacements for the field army. Next, the training section. The task of the training section during the war was to bring new insights into the field of troop and leadership training to the attention of the field army and the replacement army via the command of the reserve army, in the form of regulations, pamphlets, training instructions, etc., insofar as the task was not carried out directly by the individual arms. The sections Foreign Armies East and West were responsible for analyzing the data about foreign armies with special regards for operational matters. They also gave instructions for recon missions and suggestions for recon flights. The Military Science section was responsible to survey all relevant documents and to summarize the war experience for the whole military. The Military Survey and Mapping section provided maps and geographical data. In the German military archives I found some interesting documents that clarify the responsibilities of the different sections. When it comes to maps, it is noted that foreign armies are responsible for the Feindlagerkarte, enemy situation map, whereas the operations section is responsible for the Lagerkarte, situation map, noting in parentheses blue and red to indicate friendly and enemy forces. In terms of information flow, it is noted that if certain information is relevant for several sections, for instance messages that include both tactical and technical information, the information should be first sent to the operations section and it will pass on the relevant information to the relevant sections. It is added that this is also the case if it is not certain which section is responsible. Let us look at some major changes throughout the war. After the outbreak of the war, the Waffengenerale, literally weapons general, were established. Note, a meaningful translation is arms general, since they represent their respective combat arm, for instance infantry, combat engineers, artillery, etc. At the Army High Command, separate representations of the arms for the field army became necessary. The weapons inspectors were fully occupied with their task in the replacement army, therefore the position of the arms general and the commander of the army were created and placed under the chief of the general staff. They had similar responsibilities for the field army as the weapons inspectors for the replacement army and were also advisors for the arms in the headquarters in the Army High Command regarding the use of the general headquarters troops. The organization and the training of the arm. They were set up after the Polish campaign in October 1939, the general of the combat engineers and fortifications, the general of the infantry, the general of the artillery. On March 5th, 1940, the general of the fast troops, and on September 4th, 1940, the general of the Nebeltruppe. The chief of the army signals, who had been in place since the beginning of the war, also represented the interests of the signal troops. The general of the East troops, General der Osttruppen, was established in December 1942. In January 1944, it was renamed into General of the Voluntary Formations, General der Freiwilligenverbände. Note, there were several more of these generals. In late 1944, the Waffengeneräle would be subordinated to the commander of the replacement army and not the general staff anymore. Note that the Generalinspektor der Panzertruppen, established in 1943, was not an arms general like those previously mentioned. It was directly subordinated to Hitler and not the chief of the general staff. The general of the fast troops was disbanded and replaced with the tank officer at the general staff, Panzeroffizier beim Generalstab. In November 1941, the section of military surveying and mapping would no longer be subordinated to the senior quartermaster, 5. The reason was that the war had expanded into North Africa and the Soviet Union, as such a section grew and became more important. Subsequently, in 1942, the senior quartermaster's 5 was disbanded. The subordinate military science section took over its responsibility. Following the failed attempt to kill Hitler in July 1944, the National Socialist Leadership Officer at the General Staff was established. Note, an office of this type was already established in December 1943, but these officers served in divisions and other institutions, not directly in the General Staff. This ultimately led to the following structure of the Army's General Staff in 1944-45. At the top was still the Chief of the General Staff. His subordinates were as follows: the National Socialist Leadership Officer at the General Staff, the Central Section, the Commandant at the headquarters of the Army High Command, the leading group, Führungsgruppe, at the General Staff of the Army, which consisted of the Operations Section, which from October 1944 onward included the section National Fortifications, Organization Section, and Foreign Armies East. Then there was the Quartermaster General for Supply and Wartime Administration, the Chief of Transportation, the Chief of the Army Signals, the training section, the Chief of War Maps and Geographical Survey, and the section Foreign Armies West. To summarize, the German General Staff in the Second World War in its structure was streamlined over the war. While in 1938 there were 5 Oberquartiermeister, in 1940 there were only 3 left, and by 1942 there were 0. Meanwhile, the individual sections show continuity. Some of them were shifted around, but until late war stayed for the most part. 1. The section for national fortifications was disbanded before the war, re-established shortly in 1940, and finally re-established again in 1944, to be then integrated into another section in October the same year. It shows that the structure was flexible. The question remains how coherent it was, particularly the Generalinspektor der Panzertruppen sticks out. Similarly, the late war organization makes the apparent focus on the Eastern Front visible. Of course, the question is how effective the structure and organization was. But that is something for a different video. Big thank you to Roman Töppel for pointing me to several sources. Thank you to Andrew for reviewing the script. Thank you for watching and see you next time.